In the annals of Western philosophy, few rivalries are so famous and controversial as the one between Arthur Schopenhauer and Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. These two towering figures of the 19th century were both deeply influenced by Immanuel Kant, yet their philosophical paths couldn't have been more divergent. Hegel, the historicist philosopher, centered his entire worldview on the philosophy of history. He saw history not as a chaotic series of events, but as a grand, progressive journey, one in which humanity, through the collective unfolding of time, moves toward greater freedom. It's the idea of absolute spirit, the belief that humanity's true purpose lies in realizing its full potential. And while many thinkers were drawn to Hegel's vision, none took it as far as Karl Marx, who would go on to reshape the world with ideas that found their roots in Hegel's thought. But then there's Schopenhauer. Unlike Hegel, Schopenhauer was the philosopher of pessimism, the one who stared unflinchingly into the abyss of life's meaninglessness and didn't look away. To him, life is driven by an insatiable metaphysical force, the will to live. It's an irrational, relentless energy that propels us forward, often toward pain and suffering. His philosophy wasn't about progress or idealism, it was about resignation. The key to overcoming life's endless turmoil, he argued, is to withdraw from the will to live itself. If Hegel offered a future of progressive freedom, Schopenhauer offered the harsh reality of life's futility and the need for ascetic resignation. And if Schopenhauer had his spiritual heir, it was none other than Friedrich Nietzsche, who would push the boundaries of pessimism into something far more radical. You see, the rivalry between Schopenhauer and Hegel isn't just a clash of ideas, it's a reflection of two competing views on the very nature of existence. Hegel, with his optimism, believed in a world moving forward, inching toward enlightenment and freedom. Schopenhauer, in contrast, stood firm in his belief that the struggle to live, no matter how hard we try, will always lead us back to suffering. In The World as Will and Representation, Schopenhauer's disdain for Hegel is unmistakable. In the preface, he criticizes what he sees as the false, bad, and absurd Hegelian philosophy, even labeling it a form of charlatanism. Throughout the book, Schopenhauer doesn't hold back, calling Hegel an intellectual Caliban and a stupid charlatan. He describes Hegel's philosophy as mind-destroying nonsense, mocking its verbosity as akin to the ramblings of a madhouse. What's striking is that Schopenhauer's text is otherwise clear and organized, with these personal attacks seeming out of place and offering little to his main arguments. Despite Schopenhauer's barrage, Hegel never reciprocated with such venom. This raises an interesting question. Why did Schopenhauer harbor such intense hatred for Hegel? Schopenhauer's intense animosity toward Hegel can partly be traced back to his own personality. Cynical, irritable, and often bitter, Schopenhauer wasn't known for his sociability. His mother once wrote to him, "You irritate me endlessly, criticize everything but yourself, and push people away. No one can tolerate being criticized by someone with so many flaws. If you weren't so insufferable, you'd be laughable. But now, you're unbearable." Schopenhauer's critical nature and disregard for social niceties were apparent. Initially trained as a merchant, he abandoned that path after 2 years to pursue philosophy, starting his academic journey late, at 22, under the guidance of Gottlob Ernst Schulze at the University of Göttingen. Schulze directed him toward the works of Plato and Immanuel Kant, which Schopenhauer absorbed deeply, shaping his own philosophical foundation. By the time Hegel rose to prominence at the University of Berlin, Schopenhauer had already developed a well-defined philosophy rooted in Kant and Plato. Despite both philosophers admiring Kant, their approaches were vastly different. Hegel's complex, often opaque style must have felt alienating to Schopenhauer, who saw his philosophy as a direct contrast to his own. To truly grasp Hegel's philosophy, Schopenhauer would have needed to put in the same effort he did with Plato and Kant, but he saw no value in doing so. His reaction was predictable. He dismissed Hegel's complex style as a cover for the lack of substance in his ideas. For someone with a well-formed philosophical stance, encountering something radically different often breeds dismissal rather than curiosity. Schopenhauer viewed Hegel's obscurity as a troubling trend in philosophy. To Schopenhauer, philosophy should not devolve into mere wordplay, a complex mix of calculations and formulas requiring only lower faculties. Hegel's approach, in his view, led to nonsense, mind-destroying Hegelism, as he called it. While Schopenhauer's critique may have been exaggerated, he had earned the right to criticize, given his own writing was among the clearest and most comprehensible in German philosophy. Schopenhauer's issues with Hegel didn't stop at obscurity. He also opposed Hegel's historicism. For Hegel, philosophy wasn't about eternal truths, but about ideas evolving through history. He didn't judge ideas by their truth or falsehood alone, but by their place in the historical development of thought. Schopenhauer, however, was more traditional, aligning with Plato and Kant in believing that philosophy must focus on what is permanent and unchanging, not on historical shifts. As Schopenhauer put it, the Hegelians who place the philosophy of history at the heart of philosophy should be reminded of Plato's view that philosophy concerns the eternal, not the changing. All who construct theories of the world's course have missed the central truth of philosophy, that what is remains the same, and all changes are merely apparent. Only ideas are permanent and time is an illusion. For Schopenhauer, the will is one of the few things that remains permanent and unchanging. While people, animals, and objects are born and die, the will beneath them remains constant, immortal, boundless, and defined by its incessant striving. Changes are mere illusions, and focusing on them misleads philosophers, preventing them from understanding the true essence of the world. Schopenhauer saw Hegel as damaging philosophy by focusing on history, which diverted attention from the eternal, unchanging truths that he believed were the heart of genuine philosophy. This leads directly to their next major disagreement: Schopenhauer's pessimism versus Hegel's historical optimism. Hegel acknowledged the horrors of history, understanding that its progress is often drenched in blood. Yet, his optimism lay in the belief that these violent events were not random, but meaningful episodes in a larger historical development aimed at the realization of freedom. For example, while the French Revolution was violent, it also proclaimed the rights of man, bringing humanity closer to its ultimate goal: freedom and self-consciousness, both in politics and philosophy. For Schopenhauer, freedom in the empirical world was a mere illusion, and the closest thing to purpose in life was the realization that it's not worth living, leading to a rejection of life itself. He believed historical progress was impossible because no matter how much things change, the will, irrational, aimless, and constantly striving, would remain the same. Humanity, he argued, would always strive without ever finding true satisfaction or purpose. The notion that history is progressing towards something meaningful was a delusion for him. While Hegel saw a rational, progressive development of self-consciousness, Schopenhauer saw an endless cycle of meaningless events. For Schopenhauer, studying history wasn't about progress, but understanding the inherent suffering and destruction of life, shattering naive optimism. Their conflicting views on history are evident in how they viewed Napoleon. Both philosophers happened to see him in person, and their reactions revealed their contrasting perspectives. It said that Hegel had just completed the Phenomenology of Spirit, detailing the journey of absolute spirit toward freedom and self-consciousness when he witnessed Napoleon entering Vienna. Hegel famously described Napoleon as a world soul, someone whose actions embodied his historical era and moved it forward. To Hegel, Napoleon was a symbol of optimism, an individual of great historical significance who pushed history toward its next stage. Schopenhauer, in contrast to Hegel, was deeply pessimistic about Napoleon. He saw Napoleon as a symbol of the malice and suffering inherent in the human will, revealing the misery bound to the will to life. Schopenhauer wrote that Napoleon embodied the purpose of the world, not as a force of progress, but as a powerful reminder of the endless suffering caused by egoism and striving. For Schopenhauer, Napoleon was not a reflection of absolute spirit or historical progress, but a tragic manifestation of the will, a violent and unchanging force driving humanity towards suffering and destruction. Both philosophers, despite their opposing views, saw Napoleon as a reflection of their own beliefs. Hegel saw him as a figure embodying historical progress, while Schopenhauer saw him as a tragic figure reflecting the inherent suffering of existence. Their differing interpretations of Napoleon show how their philosophical disagreements went beyond academia, shaping how they understood the events and politics of their time. In 1848, during the German Revolution, Schopenhauer saw the revolutionaries as embodiments of irrational, selfish striving, which he believed led to suffering. He even supported the soldiers fighting to suppress the revolution, reflecting his belief in the inevitability of human suffering due to unchecked will. In 1819, after his magnum opus failed to gain significant attention, Schopenhauer applied for a private lecturer position at the University of Berlin, where Hegel held the chair of philosophy. Schopenhauer requested that his lectures be scheduled at the same time as Hegel's, a move considered arrogant by many faculty members. Hegel, however, appeared unaffected and granted the request. In 1820, Schopenhauer was required to pass a test lecture, which was evaluated by several professors, including Hegel. The lecture seemed to go well, except for one instance when Hegel questioned Schopenhauer's use of the term animal functions, suspecting confusion between motives and causal factors. A brief argument followed, but another professor defended Schopenhauer, pointing out that his terminology aligned with the zoology of the time. Hegel, deciding not to press further, qualified Schopenhauer for his position. However, Schopenhauer later viewed this moment as a humiliation, claiming Hegel had tried to prevent his qualification and had shown ignorance of natural science. Despite this, Schopenhauer secured the lecturing spot, though his lectures were poorly attended, overshadowed by Hegel's celebrity status. Eventually, Schopenhauer left Berlin, likely harboring increased resentment towards Hegel. This incident further fueled Schopenhauer's disdain for academia. He believed academic philosophy lacked integrity, as it had to cater to certain influential groups, promoting conformity. At the time, German universities were funded by royalty, and teaching anything opposed by the monarchy could jeopardize one's position. Schopenhauer critiqued the academic system for subordinating truth to the interests of the wealthy sponsors. He quoted the phrase, "I sing the song of him whose bread I eat," contrasting the selfless philosophy of Plato and Socrates, who taught without charge, with the sophists who demanded payment. Schopenhauer believed his philosophy was better suited for a self-funded career rather than an academic one tied to external financial pressures. This anti-academic sentiment would later resonate with Nietzsche, who admired Schopenhauer's courage to stand apart. At a time when Hegelianism dominated, Schopenhauer refused to conform, even if it meant alienating himself from academia. Nietzsche, in turn, faced similar challenges, shunned by academic peers and struggling to attract students to his lectures. During these difficult periods, he looked up to Schopenhauer as a model of the untimely person, someone out of sync with the historical moment they inhabited. Ironically, Schopenhauer, who was known for his cynical pessimism, ended his life with a sense of relative optimism. His works had gained popularity, and he started to gather admirers and disciples. Eventually, academia recognized and acknowledged his contributions. He saw this delayed recognition as proof of his belief that truly valuable things take time to be appreciated. Schopenhauer passed away in 1860 from pulmonary respiratory failure while sitting at home on his couch. The last friend to visit him reported that he was at peace with his impending death. In the outro, the speaker expressed gratitude to their patrons, recognizing their support as the foundation for the work. They shared their intentions to delve deeper into philosophical topics in future content, including a potential exploration of the German Revolution, despite the extensive research required for such a project. The speaker concluded by wishing viewers well, hoping for a pleasant day and an eventual reunion in the summer.